After a 2-year investigation, the 400-page-plus and heavily redacted Mueller report on Trump-Russia collusion is finally in the public domain. And we're going to cross live now to RT's Caleb Maupin, who's in New York now. Caleb, plenty of anticipation leading up to the release. Has it lived up to expectations in the US?
Well, it's well over 400 pages that we have from the Robert Mueller report. And if you look over it, the conclusion seems to be pretty clear. We heard from William Barr, the Attorney General of the United States, and he concluded that it seems to pretty clearly conclude that there was no collusion. There was no collusion between the between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russia during the elections. Let's take a listen.
So that's the bottom line. After nearly 2 years of investigation, thousands of subpoenas, hundreds of warrants, and witness interviews, the special counsel confirmed that the Russian government sponsored efforts to illegally interfere with the 2016 presidential election, but did not find that the Trump campaign or other Americans colluded in those efforts.
Now, Trump has given comments indicating that this seems to be a good day for him. This is Donald Trump reacting to the release of the Bob Mueller report.
And they're having a good day. I'm having a good day, too. It was called No Collusion, No Obstruction.
Now, Democratic leaders are taking a look at the report and seeing something quite different. They are saying that the report shows that some obstruction may have taken place, and they now want to hold the president accountable. There are calls now for testimony from Robert Mueller to congressional committees about the report itself. This has been the reaction of Democratic leaders in Congress.
As we continue to review the report, one thing is clear. Attorney General Barr presented a conclusion that the president did not obstruct justice, while Mueller's report appears to undercut that finding.
Even in its incomplete form, the Mueller report outlines disturbing evidence that President Trump engaged in obstruction of justice and other misconduct.
Now, at this point, we see in the report arguments from Robert Mueller laying out why Congress legally has the ability to investigate the President of the United States in the case that he has broken laws or engaged in obstruction. Now, top Democrats at this point are calling for Bob Mueller to testify before congressional committees about his report. Now, the House Judiciary Committee has requested that special counsel Robert Mueller appear before them before May 23rd. We have also heard that the House Intelligence Committee is also calling for Bob Mueller to testify before them regarding a counterintelligence investigation that they will be launching. So at the moment, we have Trump coming forward and saying no collusion. We have the U.S. Attorney General coming forward and saying no collusion. But Democrats are saying that the report opens some questions that they want to look into. So it appears that talk about Russia will continue, despite the fact that we now have the 400-page report from Robert Mueller and the Attorney General saying that it pretty clearly shows what Trump has said from the beginning, that being that there was no collusion between Trump and Russia during the 2016 presidential campaign.
OK, Caleb Maupin there reporting from New York. Thanks, Caleb. And earlier I spoke to our senior correspondent, Murad Gazdiev, on the details of the much-anticipated report.
The report itself, I mean, we heard about 400 pages. Let me just show you what those 400 pages, many of them look like. It's almost modern art. This is how much was redacted from the report. And you can go for pages and pages with nothing legible, really. There's so much redacted in this report that it is honestly very difficult to get a picture of what they were saying at certain points. For example, they seem convinced that there was Russian meddling, yet they say no collusion.
The Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systematic fashion. Evidence of Russian government operations began to surface in mid-2016. In June, the Democratic National Committee and its cyber response team publicly announced that Russian hackers had compromised its computer network. Releases of hacked materials, hacks that public reporting soon attributed to the Russian government, began that same month. Additional releases followed in July through the organisation WikiLeaks, with further releases in October and November. The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities.
Now, the report makes many accusations, many allegations about Russian hacking. It describes how Russian military intelligence units and troll companies, troll firms, factories meddled in the election. The problem is, I went through the report, the first sections detailing Russian hacking. There's almost no proof, no evidence. It's incredibly light on details, on technical aspects, specifics. It's just very, very general. The Russians did this, the Russians did this. Take us at our word. There's also contradictory information. At certain points, they say that 2 aliases that the Russians used, apparently, DC leaks and another one, that Russian military intelligence officers communicated with each other, apparently in English, over Twitter. Which is very strange. You'd think if this was the Russian military intelligence directorate, they'd stand up and shout to each other. No, not in this case. They allege that the Russians hacked all sorts of things. Nevertheless, they also admit that they never actually got their hands physically on the DNC servers that were hacked and where Clinton's emails were leaked from, which is very strange. They say they got copies later on, the FBI. There's all sorts of little snippets, contradictory information that, is worth picking at, but it is impossible because so much is redacted. It's page after page that is barely legible. And the Russians have said largely the same thing. The Kremlin has said a statement. They're looking at the Mueller report, but they say there's no evidence, there's no proof, there's no sort of information that they can address, talk about. It's all allegations and suspicion. At certain points, they say the Russian hackers appear to have done something, so even they aren't convinced. And the Russians are saying what they've always said, that there was no state-sponsored meddling, and their hands are clean of this.
And I had to repeat what I've said several times, including in our personal contacts. The Russian state never has and never will interfere in internal American affairs.
Nevertheless, a number of Russian companies have been targeted. There's legal action against them. A number of individuals as well. 12 military intelligence officers have been indicted. Obviously, Russia won't give them up, if any way you look at it. But there's an interesting thing as well. One specific company that there's legal action ongoing against isn't being told what the proof, the evidence against them is. Because apparently it's sensitive information. This is a remarkable situation. It's like accusing someone of a crime and then refusing to tell them what they did wrong. And it's especially strange because they're apparently concerned that the Russians will find out what the Russians did. It's very strange, but again, it might be in the redacted sections that we haven't seen, that the public isn't being shown. Nevertheless, there's a lot to get through, and I'm sure there'll be more talked about.
Yeah, I mean, you've talked about the confusion. So despite the confusion, the unanswered questions, the redactions, it is still a very comprehensive report, isn't it?
Oh, it was huge. $25 million they spent putting this report together. 50-odd FBI agents working for 2 years. They looked at more than 1 million documents, financial receipts, emails, invited, staged 2,500 interviews, 2,800 subpoenas, 34 indictments. It was tremendously huge, but they looked at 3 things. One, Russian meddling, which, again, they're incredibly light on the details. They also looked at whether Trump or any of his associates colluded with Russia. On that, they were pretty categorical that there was no collusion, something Trump has boasted about. And the last thing they looked at is whether Trump tried to obstruct justice by firing the former director of the FBI when the investigation was in its infancy. But here we've got a little bit of confusion because the report says that they haven't decided either way. There's not enough evidence. It's all very difficult. Trump has taken this as a victory. He says that there was no obstruction, no collusion. The House, the U.S. House, Democrat majority, the House Judiciary Committee is now saying that this report condemns Trump. It says that there was obstruction, and they promised to look into it. Nevertheless, the report's been released, but I'm sure that there's plenty more drama, plenty more details to come.